In the depths of space, there exists a vast emptiness that some might say is unbalanced, unimaginable, and uninviting to those who wish to explore it. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, Earth may receive some unwelcome visitors, as well as some welcome ones that we didn't know we needed. This is a world where monsters exist, and humans are alone in protecting the floating rock they call home. The alien Ultraman was once a protector, but now there are new invaders, and the only one who can stop them is the 7th member of the Ultra Guard, Ultraseven. While kaijus have been the biggest focal point of Ultraman, you can find deeper roots with media much older than Godzilla, even going as far back as Astro Boy and Tetsujin 28, with their sci-fi themes and how much they influenced Japanese pop culture. However, it hasn't always been in Japan, as a young man once grew inspired from an old American movie called King Kong. As the popularity of Godzilla led to a kaiju boom, monster movies began to take over in Japan, in no small part with who many consider the father of Tokusatsu, Eiji Tsuburaya. His inspiration from King Kong led him to working in special effects at Toho Motion Pictures Corporation. Nearly a decade later, in 1963, he founded what would become known as Tsuburaya Productions, while still being a part of Toho. All the while, he was still providing Toho with direction and special effects. And he was even united with King Kong through his direction on King Kong vs. Godzilla. From the mind of Eiji Tsuburaya came the way that movies and eventually shows were presented, surrounding not only giant monsters, but the creative advancements of special effects at the time. The careful mixture of puppetry and suit acting brought Godzilla to life in 1954. Later films in the series didn't quite capture that same level of detail that the original film had. What did come close, however, was Ultra Q in 1966. The very first episode showed off miniature work in an incredible way, by recreating the worksite that Gomez and Lithra battled in through a scale model. Though Gomez is actually a retooling of Toho's Godzilla suit, there is a specific kind of eeriness to consider when this new character is actually supposed to be 10 meters tall, especially the side-by-side editing showing off the people witnessing these monsters. It cannot be understated how much these early works ingrained themselves for Tsuburaya, Toho, and in the tokusatsu medium as a whole. Each episode of Ultra Q felt like movie events similar to Godzilla, and Ultraman perfected a formula that created several household names. There's a level of context given to the mystery of Ultra Q that's presented in Ultraman. The monsters in that show now have an enemy in the world's protector, Ultraman. Though with this sense of security comes a degree of relief for the rest of the show. There are plenty of episodes that depict lighthearted situations, or at least there's an assurance that everything will be okay, even in the last episode. The story of Shin Hayata and the Science Patrol vs. Giant Monsters were just a start for Tsuburaya Productions, or Supro for short. But there was one issue, one major question that no one was prepared for. What's next? While Tsuburaya and his company were planning the next show, something else had to take over Ultraman's TV slot, which was taken by Toei's own Captain Ultra. It was meant to ride the sci-fi trend happening because of Ultraman, even deriving from a similar name. The premise seemed a little too familiar to Lost in Space. The show was made to air on the Tokyo Broadcasting System, or TBS, in the year 1967, and while Captain Ultra grew a cult following, it underperformed in both toys and TV ratings, despite it often being referred to as a filler series only made to fill a slot before Tsuburaya's next project. In fact, it was such a filler show that Captain Ultra was cut short by 2 episodes to make room for something else. Luckily, TBS didn't have to wait much longer because Supro came back with what they wanted to be something completely different from Ultraman. Due to their previous success, Supro was given more freedom with only a few caveats. caveats, one being that this new show had to be cheaper to produce. Tsuburaya didn't want to keep this project to have anything to do with Ultraman, but still wanted to keep ideas that worked and that he himself enjoyed. From the start, this project would go by several names, but only to protect their copyright while keeping its real name a secret. Some names it went by were Redman, Fireman, and even just Ultraman, but beneath it all was Ultra Eye. While the original Ultraman focused on the monsters, Ultra Eye would focus on human drama. The story would be of a man named Dan Muraboshi who would fight with the Ultra Guard. This is entertainment told by 7 primitive monkeys. One of the main writers, Tetsuo Kinjo, originally wrote this scenario as a successor to Kaiju Buska. This was at a time when Buska was originally the only show Supra was airing at the time. It could have been very possible that they were going to keep Buska going with Ultraman being left behind. But plans for the series fell through, and Supra focused their efforts on a successor to Ultraman instead. This sentence was described by Kinjo to again describe the show as a whole. But what does it mean? Though silly out of context, I guess you can describe the next project that way as well. Think of it this way. The 7 members of the Ultra Guard are merely vehicles to guide the story along for every episode. This is set in a world in the future where peace has been achieved. War was only once a modern concept. And yet, here it is only a deadly reminder of a regressive society. The only war there is left to face is from invaders. The show, as a whole, is entertainment. The Ultra Guard is a set piece for the show to have a concrete narrative to go from. It's equivalent to Dale Cooper and his coffee. It's Columbo and him crafting the how they done it scenario. It's Popeye and the spinach. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but regardless. Entertainment told by 7 primitive monkeys. Maybe it's a completely meaningless sentence told by Kinjo in jest, but it's something to think about regardless. The Triple SP was a popular part of Ultraman, so Tsuburaya wanted more stories revolving around this new defense team, the Ultra Guard, or Ultra Garrison depending on your translation, as long as it's initiated UG. Giant monsters weren't even an idea in the beginning, just the war of aggression between planets. But TBS saw the success of Ultraman and wanted a henshin hero who fought kaiju. ここにタイトル貼ります. With drama comes a serious tone, and that tone sets Ultra Eye for its future. It was the glue that would hold together practically every aspect of the show. Now it just needed a finalized name. Ultraseven. The name comes from Dan Muraboshi being the 7th member of the Ultra Guard, and with some inspiration from Tetsuo Kinjo. After several drafts, some back and forth with TBS, plus the ideas from not only Eiji Tsuburaya but almost literally everyone involved in production, Ultraseven was born and aired on September 8th, 1968. What Japanese viewers first saw was this strange opening, similar yet different to Ultra Q and Ultraman before it. As the name Ultraseven begins to form, a mysterious musical sting starts with the famous clack of Ultra Q. It almost reminds you of the old Godzilla theme. And then... the few familiar notes play out. It feels triumphant, heroic, and then begins Ultraseven no Uta. It sounds kind of like an anthem where it opens with those brass instruments, and that's because the song was performed by the Echoes, a band that specifically plays military marches and TV theme songs. You can also catch a glimpse of the original Ultraman style with the return of the Misuzu Children's Choir singing along. Ultraseven's theme is a classic and still remembered fondly to this day. How can you forget the chant of... My personal favorite detail is that the main character's name, Dan Muraboshi, is part of the lyrics, which is extremely rare for TV songs. When you think of Ultraman's theme, you might visualize silhouettes across solid backgrounds like the original, but I like the mesmerizing lava lamp effect from Ultraseven. Such an iconic song can be heard in so many ways, whether it's live, with a bigger orchestra from the 40 years later version, a new rendition sung by Isao Sasaki for Heisei Ultraseven, and Hajime no Ippo, interestingly enough. In English from the Hawaiian broadcast sung by Masato Shimon, along with a brand new visual opening.
March to the end of the big Milky Way with ultra eyes.
A cover by the US Navy. Something, metal with animetal. And my personal favorite, a rock version by Kagaku Tokosota. All this before we even start the episode itself. Episode 1, The Invisible Challenger. You can immediately see a contrast from what came before, as the first visual we see is the darkness of night, and the narrator saying that Earth is a target of visitors from outer space who are planning an invasion. Luckily, there is a defense group that was made to defend civilians from these invaders. The Terrestrial Defense Force has cutting-edge technology and over 300 members, but 5 of these members form the Ultra Guard. Leading the Ultra Guard is Captain Kiriyama, who is told by his superiors that people have been disappearing, so it can only be aliens. Also making up the team is Furuhashi, the athletic man of the Ultra Guard, who sure looks familiar, Amagi, played by Bin Furuya, acting here as a team strategist rather than in the suit of Ultraman in the previous show, and a nurse as well as a kind-hearted soul, and Soga, the team sharpshooter. It's important to note that the lightheartedness of the Triple SP in Ultraman is barely shown here in the Ultra Guard. It's understandable as this show requires the team to be on their A game at all times, but like I said before, this is, for the most part, a glimpse into a different world from the one in Ultraman. Some things are gloomier, and you probably won't catch Soga slipping on a banana peel like how Ide might have in the previous series. During their investigation, Furuhashi and Soga get stopped by a man in yellow, a wanderer known as Dan Moroboshi. Dan somehow knows their names, and knows of alien activity. Don't you just love late 60s special effects? I mean that both ironically and unironically because these miniatures are really good, juxtaposed by whatever the barrier's supposed to be. Then we're introduced to our first alien of the show, Alien Cool. Once again, not exactly a giant monster type that we all know, just an extraterrestrial that wants to take over the planet. The really interesting things about the aliens in this show is that there are just so many times they are shown to be inhumanly proportioned, as opposed to having the same bipedal structure and facial patterns as humans. Even the aliens that are bipedal are so, well, alien. It's refreshing to see. It's funny to think that Ultraman in design was directly based off the Roswell Gray aliens, and here, they're straying away from that. We also see the miniature effect really going to work as we get a very long scene of pure destruction. While the kaiju boom began to die down by the end of 1967, sci-fi was still a huge topic, and Tsuburaya's interest in Western themes seeped their way into Ultraseven. Much of the Ultra Guard's arsenal would be influenced by Thunderbirds, which you'll easily be able to see throughout the show. Plus, we really feel the human drama as the Ultra Guard and Dan figure out a way to defeat Alien Cool before Tokyo is attacked. The Ultra Guard uses a special missile so Alien Cool's spaceship is no longer invisible, but the Guard is shot down. With no other choice, Dan introduces us to another concept, capsule monsters. Our first one is named Wyndham, a robot chicken. Although Wyndham gets defeated by tiny pink ships, and then Dan has to take things into his own hands by transforming into Ultraseven. Blink and you miss it, the first transformation goes quick since the full sequence has Dan wearing the Ultra Guard uniform. You can even see the neck of it here, but we'll get to all that and more in a bit. With as fast as Dan transforms, he also quickly takes down Alien Cool. Oh my god, he just got murdered! And so, the day is saved, and Dan becomes the 6th member of the Ultra Guard, while the Red Giant is the honorary 7th member. The ending is quick, but it's supposed to ensure that the rest of the series has a concrete basis to work off of. You'll be able to tell more so by watching the show itself, but Ultraseven is a very slow series with a lot of tension. It takes its time to show practically every detail, and while it's not going to appeal to everyone, it certainly gives a different tone and pacing that still isn't very common in modern tokusatsu. When the Ultra Guard take their ships to find Alien Cool, we get a good couple of minutes just looking at the shots of these ships and their hangars, and when they're in action, they're separating, then combining, then separating again. I know that probably sounds really boring, but it almost feels like a movie just seeing the work put into these sets to create something as simple as combining two pieces of gray plastic. Another example is of Ultraseven's encounter with Alien Cool. When the alien gets its head cut into two pieces, the shot lingers as the puppet's arms slowly stop moving. That's both creepy and daunting. Or also when Alien Cool was attacking Earth, and like I mentioned, the scene going on for quite a while, as these miniatures keep being blown up. But it's a spectacle to see all these flames and explosions of a small yet extremely detailed set. You can very easily notice the sci-fi inspirations, then see how Ultraseven separates itself from everything else that was booming at the time, while also introducing new concepts and themes that will become influential in pop culture. The capsule monsters aren't seen very often, but that idea alone was so unique and larger than life that it influenced Satoshi Tajiri to create Pokemon. Combine bug collecting and Dan Moriboshi's capsules, and you can see the inspiration for these pocket monsters. We only see 3 capsule monsters in the main show, those being Wyndham, Miklas, and Agira. One of the most famous monsters, Sevenger, appears later in a single episode of Ultraman Leo, but others like Wyndham are popular in their own right. Why the capsule monsters were rarely used has several reasons. Either they were too difficult to write into the story, too much work to set behind the scenes, or because the budget didn't allow for them. Still, seeing Dan open up his box of capsules were always a treat. There were plans to have the monsters to be returning ones from the original Ultraman and Ultra Q, such as Pegula, Red King, and Antlar, but the main reason they weren't included is because Ultraseven wasn't originally meant to be connected to Ultraman at all. During its entire run, from pre-production until the next season, Ultraseven would have 0 previous connections and would only be its own thing, for the most part. Though Ultraman had plenty of returning concepts from Ultra Q, such as monsters like Kemer or Ragan, there was actually one single veteran kaiju from Ultraman that appeared in Ultraseven, and that's Suflan. Having Ultra in the title and similar styles from Ultraman were only to capitalize on Japan's sci-fi craze, while everything else was completely different, which worked out for the better. Ultraseven's first quarter exceeded expectations and ratings, and the Ultra Guard ship became one of the top-selling toys. Although kids weren't the main viewer base, old reports described Ultraseven as a sci-fi show for adults, as Ultraman was to a younger audience. Tone was a huge factor in its success, as well as pulling back on the Henshin hero. Ultraseven himself actually isn't seen that much throughout the show, mostly being saved for the last couple of minutes. Sure, sometimes he's there for longer, but for the most part, it's the Ultra Guard show featuring Ultraseven. And on top of that, there are times where the Ultra Guard barely appear at all, then it becomes a show about human drama, which again helped appeal to the adult viewer base. Episodes exemplifying this include episode 45, Liz's personal favorite episode, where Dawn acts as a supporting role. It's to accentuate the main character of the episode, the lonely astrologer, Saburo, and his continuing boy who cried wolf scenario, but more on that later. Although Ultraseven isn't a bad-looking Henshin hero, there were several drafts and ideas for his final design. This hero could fight monsters no matter their size, even if they were the same height as a human, and Todo Narita wanted something more mechanical, like a knight with a maximal design. He helped design a lot for Supro, so he understood what Ultraseven needed. First drafts had the hero look like a robot, and a man wearing chainmail. However, to make the design different from Ultraman, Narita excluded the iconic color timer at first, and created a unique head shape with what could be described as a mane. There was also a design for Ultraseven to be blue, a few decades before we got our first true blue Ultraman in Ultraman Gaia. Since Ultraman having a color timer added much to Narita's distaste, he designed a lamp on Ultraseven's head to keep it familiar without needing another major change. Dan uses the Ultra Eye to transform. the device coming from the original project name. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite devices, if only because of how different it is. The only other time I saw glasses used to transform is in Power Rangers, and I liked it there too. Plus, these actually look kinda cool. In the modern day, there were actual reading glasses that used this design, and it's as silly as you think it would be. To continue with the disconnect of Ultraman, Ultraseven doesn't have a proper transformation rise, not even in modern appearances. I still think it's iconic in its own right, with each armor piece forming at a time, even if the glasses being put on first does look a little silly. While Bin Furuya was no longer suit acting as the main hero, we still got great performances from Koji Ueneshi, who brought Ultraseven to life, though in the Ultra Garrison Goes West 2-parter, he was performed by Eiji Kikuchi, future Ultraman Jack suit actor. Interestingly, you can tell the difference between the two performers. Ueneshi has his fists out more times like a boxer, accentuating the brute fighting style in 7 that wasn't seen in Bin Furuya's Ultraman. Kikuchi's 7, however, is much more loose in fighting, and is seen sometimes with one fist and the other hand in the chopping position, very similar to how Ultraman Jack is later shown with. There's actually an in-universe explanation for Ultraseven and Ultraman's fighting styles, although it's more told retroactively rather than anything from the main show, since like I said, Ultraseven originally had no prior connection. Lore-wise, Ultraseven was a map maker from the M78 galaxy and not a warrior, so he didn't need a color timer, and his combat skills are different from any other Ultra with proper training. It's also why Ultraseven uses more special abilities and his Ice Slugger than Ultraman did with his grappling moves. Ultraseven gives us an interesting piece of lore that both Ultra Q and Ultraman would be included in, a mention of the M78 galaxy, along with the Land of Light. In episode 25, Showdown at 140 degrees below zero, we see some of the coolest kaiju, Alien Pole, the mini-alien. They talk about how the Land of Light doesn't have winter, so Ultraseven is heavily affected by the cold. Some hints were dropped in the early episodes that Dan Motoroboshi himself isn't exactly who he appears to be on the surface. As early as episode 1, we saw Dan with some strange powers. That's because he's not a host like Shin Hayata, he's actually just another form of Ultraseven. That might seem like a big revelation, but it's sung in the lyrics. He takes on the name Dan Motoroboshi, he's Ultraseven, 7. That story is told more in detail in episode 17, Underground Go Go Go, where a man named Jiro Satsuma gets trapped in a cave during a mining accident, so the Ultra Guard is called in to save him. Dan recognizes him as the man he saved when first arriving on Earth. Jiro fell during a mountain climb to save his friend, so Dan took on his appearance after seeing how selfless he was, later taking on the name Dan Motoroboshi. This is also where Miracle Man comes from, since Jiro survived a 200-meter fall and it's heard in the lyrics. At first I thought the name Dan Motoroboshi had a deeper meaning, but it's written entirely in katakana, so it might just sound cool to him. Well, Dan can mean something like warm and vigor, depending on the kanji, while Motoroboshi can mean together or star, but again, officially written in katakana. I think what also set Ultraseven apart from other shows was the way its sound was used sparingly, as the music is extremely ambient, and honestly, not as memorable as other OSTs. There are a lot of tracks that are mostly darkly toned, string with blasts of horns, and that's about it. Everything on top of that, like any other sound effect for explosions, dialogue, and even just the beeps of the Ultra Guard's bass, are more in the forefront than the tone-setting music. I think I only remember a couple of tracks outside of the main theme and the orchestral rendition of the opening. Still, if you do listen to the music on its own, then you'll catch on to the strange ambience of Ultraseven's OST. Some I'd say is even a little scary. One of my personal favorites is the track Invulnerable Dan, a song of hope as Dan marches off to fight the monster. There are a couple of vocal tracks too, though again, not as memorable as the anthem that is the main opening. The popularity of Ultraseven reached its peak pretty early on, with ratings constantly changing up and down around after episode 10, although the adult viewer base was still tuning in. And personally, I think some of the best episodes are throughout the entire show, rather than any particular half or quarter. Of course, the focus is more on the humans, but monsters big and small still had plenty of attention too. One of the main elements of the show's production was to create as many monsters as possible in order to have more merchandise, and cause they look cool. Despite that, only a few kaiju ever made it past Ultraseven's original appearance. The kaiju designs this season aren't exactly bad, but they start to blend together, in my opinion. However, the kaiju that do become famous are iconic for a reason. Episode 3, The Secret of the Lake. This episode introduces us to one of the coolest kaijus ever, King, the space monster. Alien pit twins release a weird-looking tadpole into a lake, and the Ultra Guard are called in to examine the spaceship. Then King itself emerges. Just look at the detail of the wetsuit, the moving horns and light-up mouth, plus the ear-piercing screech. Dan loses his Ultra Eye, so he calls on Miklas, another capsule monster. Dan losing his Ultra Eye is a consistent storyline throughout the show, mostly due to the antagonist's knowledge of Dan being 7. Quite a few episodes show off the invader stealing the Ultra Eye, and you'd think it would get old, but it never did. Being based on electric eels, King has electrical powers and thunder-like designs across its body and horns. One of the most interesting design choices to me are the fingers and toes having what appear to be bullet holes in place of joints. The yellow coloring wasn't intentional, as it was originally painted to be purely black and white, but being in water caused the suit to stain. There are a couple of shots where you can see the original suit, although the yellow iteration has been its main staple for years to come. King is one of my favorite kaijus, and its debut just brings the emphasis on how big, yet grounded, this series is. It wasn't just my favorite though, as it won the award for Best Monster Design in Japan during the year it debuted. I'll never forget the shot of King overlooking the lake and its surrounding area. Oh, and extreme gore warning. 3, 2, 1. F. And boom! Another really iconic monster comes in episode 14 and 15, a two-parter called The Ultra Garrison Goes West. Starting off with a new intro, this time something closer to the spitting paint of Ultra Q and Ultraman. This episode sees 4 spaceships sent by alien Pedon to attack Earth. It's a battle to keep the peace between countries, when the 4 ships combine to create one of the coolest kaijus ever, King Joe, the space robot. The Ultra Guard investigates the incident, which leads them to a United Nations embassy. This is an iconic moment in the Ultra series where people look on as the pieces come together and King Joe walks onward while being bombarded by cannons. Not even Ultraseven can take on its impenetrable armor. Just look at this beautiful shot of our giants reflecting off the water, and Ultraseven looking defeated after his laser fails to affect the robot. This iconic image of King Joe on top of Ultraseven, nearly defeating him with body force alone, is grim, looking like it can be a true final battle, much like Ultraman vs Zeton. However, Ultraseven is barely able to escape by tripping King Joe, forcing him to go into his spaceship form. Their rematch doesn't take long as Ultraseven fights him off again at a harbor. King Joe was originally meant to be more complex, with more than just 4 parts, but it wasn't feasible with the technology at the time. And even recent iterations have a tough time making the robot more modern, but not for nothing of course. One of my favorite fun facts is that he's named after Tetsuo Kinjo, honoring him for his hard work as a head writer for the series. King Joe. While the first King Joe suit here is surely charming with a soft textured costume, I much prefer how modern King Joes look more metallic, like how an actual robot would. And so, Ultraseven, along with the Ultra Guard, are able to take down the space robot and save the day, marking King Joe's place in Ultra history. If you want something otherworldly, then check out episode 11, Fly to the Mountain of Evil. An alien wild gets discovered by the Ultra Guard, so he summons one of the coolest kaiju ever, Nurse, the robot dragon. Its katakana reads Nasu, but official romanization and promo material calls it Nurse. Look at its movements. I think it's creepy, especially since it's supposed to be a mechanical robot, but it has a strange form. It can also turn into a flying saucer for alien wild to escape in, until it gets shot and bursts into flames. Nurse was also thought to be a reused used Manda puppet from the Godzilla movies, but this isn't true. Just cause they're serpent-shaped doesn't mean they're the same, although I do kinda like the name Mecha Manda. We also can't forget the coolest kaiju ever, Ultraseven. Just kidding. Of course, it's Dinosaur Tank! Clearly, you can see why some monsters are iconic and gain popularity past Ultraman, but a lot of kaiju and kaijin were left behind, never to be seen again. In fact, there was a monster that had to be scrapped and another that was outright banned. During the filming of episode 23, Anne's actress almost suffocated to death after being trapped under a giant inflated hand of Ultraseven for a stunt. The incident, on top of a low budget, caused the entire episode to be scrapped, and the robotic henchman of the alien of the episode, Alien Talk, was remade into Alien Borg. The banned monster comes from episode 12, From a Planet with Love. Young girls and later children are being lured in for their blood by one of the creepiest kaiju ever, Alien Spell. While the plot doesn't seem any more intense than any other episode, Alien Spell was considered to be an offensive depiction of atomic bomb survivors, and yeah, it does look very disturbing. What appear to be burn marks are in certain spots along its body, plus the lack of major facial features and a pale color makes this one of the scariest kaiju, especially when being held up to a real-life tragedy. The real controversy came when Alien Spell appeared on an Ultraseven trading card. Though material like this aren't always officially sanctioned, and I'm extremely certain this one wasn't, the alien was crudely subtitled Hibaku Saijin, translated as an alien after an atomic bomb. That's it's not good. Though the episode was re-aired a few times over the years, it is not included in any home media releases. How I'm able to show you clips is because it was aired overseas on TNT.
Brings the greatest defender in the universe back to Earth. Ultraseven, weekdays at 6 a.m. only on TNT.
Along with a dub by Sinar and a new visual opening with a new theme song. Ultraseven decided that being in the dark was a good look for him, I guess.
Run! Run, whatever that thing is, he saved us, Commander.
8,000 megatons, Donna.
That's 8,000 H-bombs.
Dr. Mino's quite a girl, eh?
Uh-oh, it's still blowing those ashes. Don't think we ought to hang around here, sir.
Dan dashes out of sight of the others, and using the ash as a smokescreen, converts to Ultraseven.
Wyndham, get him, boy!
Old school dubbing, huh? While not amazing, I think it gets the job done well enough. Certainly good enough to multitask with. Oh, by the way, the Ultra Eye in this dub is called the Ultra Task Mask. Wonderful. Also, Seven sometimes has Ultraman's grunts. No idea how that happened. But before the Sinar dub, Hawaii had their own dub in 1975. However, most of it has been lost to time and only 3 episodes fully exist of it. Interestingly, audio fragments of this dub were released by Tsuburaya themselves through their release of the Ultraseven Sound Library CD, suggesting that they still have this dub, but choose not to release it. With all the time and effort being put into dubbing the show twice, you'd probably ask yourself, why? Easily enough, the answer is because Ultraseven was just that popular. Hawaii has its own history when it comes to tokusatsu, as many were subtitled to air on Kiku TV, a network there that built its legacy on bringing Japanese programming and culture to a wider audience. Maybe you've heard of Go Ranger being aired in Hawaii, but one of the most famous examples is when Kikaider, or Kikaida, was subtitled and released only for Hawaii in 1974, becoming an instant hit and an icon for children in that area. Kikaider 01, Battle Fever J, and Conrider V3 were likewise brought to Hawaii, and are two fondly remembered. Naturally, Tsuburaya noticed this and brought over Ultraseven as it was rated higher than Ultraman at the time. Unlike the other shows, which subtitled tokusatsu with the audio intact, Supro opted to collaborate with the local company production to dub Ultraseven for the islands. And so, now we have this strange curiosity known as the Ultraseven Hawaii dub.
Ultraseven!
While not as successful as Kikaida, Ultraseven's dub still had its own cult following, but not large enough to keep tapes of full episodes. Though it's through fan recordings that we can still see the opening, with an English theme song sung by Masato Shimon.
No, you by another name, the Planet Man Dan.
Ultraman Leo also aired in Hawaii, but we can't find if it aired before or after 7. I mean, hey, it was somewhat successful regardless, so why not try again a decade later? Turner commissioned Cinar from Canada to dub Ultraseven and aired in syndication in North America. Sadly, the dub wasn't picked up by any networks, and there it lay dormant for yet another 10 years. TNT's programming blocks were perfect for a Japanese live-action show. These blocks regularly aired Godzilla movies, Joe Bob Briggs' curation of old horror movies and obscure classics like The Thing and The Thing when he hosted Monster Vision. Hawaii's dub was seen as a bit silly, even for the time, so with the 1985 dub of Ultraseven by Cinar on their belt, it was finally aired to a cult audience. Interesting to note, when Ultraseven aired on the Toons Till Noon block, it was heavily edited to make way for commercials, but during the times it was on Monster Vision, they aired completely unedited and uncensored. That's why we're almost able to see this dub in full because of fans who tape Monster Vision shows. Thanks guys. Though I say almost able because apparently a few episodes were mislabeled and didn't air at all. Oh well. Again, not the massive success as expected, but still good enough to be remembered by those who caught the airing. Even Space Ghost was a fan.
This Ultraseven man was a great superhero, and he was loved by all. The ratings were not so good, so they canceled Ultraseven Man and replaced him with a cartoon dog and a caveman. The moral of this story is, just because your show gets stinking canceled, it doesn't make you a bad person!
A whole video can be made just on English dubs and tokusatsu, so that's enough for now. But it's interesting to know how far Ultraseven traveled due to its massive popularity in Japan. It at least shows that Tsuburaya is willing to try to reach a larger audience. As I've kept mentioning, the human drama was so integral to Ultraseven that there are far more human-sized monsters than the giant one. Yeah, we have Ella King and King Joe, but a majority of the episodes look more into a human-sized mystery with kaijin, or smaller monsters, and seijin, Japanese for alien. I'll admit, I do prefer when there's a giant monster to fight, and not having them would seem out of place to a modern viewer, but Ultraseven has such great stories that I believe the human stories are just as good. Episode 9, Android Zero Directive. The Ultra Guard comes across a lady named 01. Insert very original and never before said joke about 01 here. Furuhashi gets attacked by her, thinking she was a regular woman. But now the mystery has Dan and Soga figure out who the lady is and what the Android Operation Zero could mean. Well, basically, Alien Chibble disguises himself and hands toy guns to children in order to control them and have them shoot civilians. Well, geez. This certainly isn't about an alien race summoning a giant monster, and that's why I like Ultraseven. It's something more grounded with a sci-fi coat of paint. Plus, later Ultras would build on top of what Ultraseven started, such as 01 and Alien Chibble returning as main antagonists for Ultraman Ginga S. I mean, once you're an eraser, you know you've made it. On a mission to test out a new way of space travel, Dawn and Soga fall asleep, then get stranded on an unknown planet where people are scarce and easily punishable. There's a quick cut to a clock reading the day that Dawn and Soga wake up on, being August 30th, 2000. Mundane objects are placed along this planet. Instead of a phone booth, which would be appropriate for 1968, Dawn finds a bright red phone in the middle of a container port. The few people they do see are unwelcoming, to put it bluntly. Dawn and Soga are immediately pinned by military officials after the two see a truck hit a child on a bike, and they're taken off to a facility. The chief of police guides them across the building, where they are told this is a place where everything is enacted, from legislation, to medical attention, to television shows. It seems automated, and it's unnaturally silent. All you can hear is the chief's audible chewing, a droning noise that doesn't seem human. Dawn and Soga are taken to see the chief, which reveals himself as a robot, and tells them about this planet's civilization. They are the result of humanity letting their luxuries take control of their world. The economy became fully automated with technology developing further and further to create robots. It came to the point that humans turned lazy, as there was nothing more to do. As such, they died out. Humans creating what they create over the way of living? Interesting. A fun fact about this episode is that director Akioji Soji and his writer Shozo Uehara were told by TBS to include a monster or else it wouldn't be produced. Yeah, this episode features no giant monster, no crazily designed alien, just humans and robots. Josoji and Uehara collaborated on a joke script for an episode that includes most of the monsters and aliens shown in the entire Ultra franchise so far, including both Ultra Q and Ultraman. The production company wants one monster that takes away from the point of the story? Well, here's a story that features 15 aliens and 35 monsters, plus a new heroic kaiju named God. The script was appropriately named Uchijin 15 plus Kaiju 35. After that, TBS pulled back and never bothered Josoji again. This episode is often considered one of the best in the series, as it tells a pretty straightforward story that isn't all that subtle about its message, and portrays it in a way that most people could understand. Technology can be bad, and even the economy could swallow up the whole of society, only if humanity makes it get to that point. Then Ultraseven blows them all up. Living in a deafening world that disturbs him to the point of sleepless nights, amateur astrologer Saburo Fukushin notices flying saucers in the sky. When he calls the Ultra Guard to look at the problem, all Dawn and Soga see is a pleasant night sky, with an unnatural number of stars. Nobody believes Saburo after that point, all except for a little boy. Day after day, Saburo will call on the guard for help, even after they advise he's only seeing things. Then it reaches a boiling point when he starts to become the loudest person in the neighborhood, screaming that there really are saucers in the sky. Then, the boy takes Saburo to his house, filled with telescopes that he wishes he had. The boy reveals himself to be a member of the alien Pedolinga, who made it so that the Ultra Guard wouldn't see their saucer formation, but that people like Saburo would, to promise them a life in the stars. After recounting the boy who cried wolf, Pedolinga makes Saburo call the Ultra Guard with details of their exact plan, taunting them in the process. The team listens to Saburo's call, noticing the alien directing him, and they go to action. Then the Ultra Guard and Ultraseven go on one of the most beautiful attack sequences to defeat the fleet. This was the last we see of alien Pedolinga, until years later. This is the story of a regular man with dreams of space. The young boy encouraged him to look upon the stars until that passion began to die down. A mundane lifestyle with the only happiness coming from looking upon the sky. Gone. Tell enough lies and you lose trust, then the real wolf will come. A beautiful story of deception and loss of passion, directed by Akioji Soji, ending in a minute-long light show filled with abstract imagery and a dark factor that'll never leave your mind, all while a distorted version of the Ultraseven theme plays. The Boy Who Cried Flying Saucer is a beautiful piece of work that can only be seen to be believed. Or will you believe it at all? Episode 8, The Targeted Town. Over a short period of time, the people of Kitagawa-cho have been getting into major accidents, whether it was in a plane crash, a train accident, or a shootout in the middle of a busy day. There's a feeling of claustrophobia and megalophobia at the same time, as the mystery of this town can only be solved by the Ultra Guard, until Furuhashi starts to go crazy as well. The close-up shots and red lighting, as well as white noise, can make the viewer feel uneasy. Dan figures out that what's causing people to go mad are cigarettes. Dan and Anne are able to find the origin of these cigarettes, with Dan in an iconic confrontation against Alien Metron, the hallucination alien. To Dan, the plan was thwarted as the cigarettes have been found, but to Alien Metron, the real plan was for humanity to distrust each other. The plan may have taken a while, but it was a success. Ultraseven fights Alien Metron at sunset in a Western-style face-off. The visuals are stunning. Once again, this episode was directed by Akioji Soji. Though he did direct some gorgeous episodes in the original Ultraman, it's his directing on 7 where his visual truly shines. It's his directing that cements The Targeted Town as one of the greatest episodes in television history. At the end of the day, Alien Metron's plan truly did fail, because as the narration says, humans don't trust each other enough to have distrust in the first place. When you think of Ultraseven, what do you think of outside the Red Giant and Giant Monsters? It would most likely be an attack/defense team that helps the Ultra and its main focus outside the fights. The Triple SP has memorable characters, of course like Shin Hayata, but Ide, Arashi, Cap, and Fuji are almost as iconic as the orange uniform and tie combination. Especially in Japan and Spanish-speaking countries, Ultraman is a symbol alongside his respective defense team, at least when it comes to the Showa era. I can definitely describe the Triple SP's personalities and a bit of themselves in general. The Ultra Guard, on the other hand, I remember their gray uniforms and their car, the Pointer. While writing the script, I was messaging Liz about our final draft, and then I was like, oh wait, we forgot to talk about the team. Well, the thing is, they're not bad, just underdeveloped. At the same time, that's kind of expected for the show's tone, since like mentioned earlier, there isn't going to be any slapstick or in-your-face type of personalities for these characters. That's not to say there's zero comedy, but I'm saying there isn't an Ide type of person here that breaks the fourth wall to remind you to brush your teeth every night. Obviously, happy-go-lucky isn't the only personality type, and being serious isn't a bad thing either. My main issue is that sometimes I can't really tell the difference between the members of the Ultra Guard. They do their job as both investigators and defense personnel, often doing a lot of the fighting against monsters until they turn giant. Dan is the only exception to my dislike of their underdevelopment, because, well, Shin Hayata didn't really have a lot of development either. Both Hayata and Dan are the protagonists and do what they need to do. Dan is shown to play light jokes sometimes. He's also extremely selfless and willing to put others first instead of his own health. So yeah, he's great. Anne is probably the next person to get development. Ironic considering her actress was gone for a good chunk of the show. Furuhashi is the most lighthearted of the team next to Anne, but he's also a bit stubborn, so he has a bit of a personality. The other three, I can't tell you anything other than they're certainly part of the team. We have the captain, Ben Furio's character, and I legitimately forgot about Soga until writing the script. Okay, still, I personally don't mind the Ultra Guard, and despite not being as memorable as a Triple SP, they get the job done. But all good things come to an end. Ultraseven was planned to have 39 episodes, much like the previous season, but TBS allowed for 10 more episodes due to its success. The only other caveat for these extra 10 is that they had to be made even cheaper on an already kind of cheaper budgeted show. Now we enter the greatest invasion in history. Dan Moriboshi is Ultraseven, and Ultraseven's time on Earth is nearly up as he gets weaker every passing day. One night, Ultraseven's superior says his battles have caused him to get heavily damaged, and it's time for him to return home to Nebula M78. Dan wants to keep protecting the planet, but has to leave his human body behind. This is Dan's only warning. Transform again, and he won't have enough energy to get home. An invasion begins the next morning. Alien Gosei calls upon the final kaiju, Pandan, the twin-headed monster. Dan pulls out his Ultra Eye and remembers his superior's warning, but Dan can't leave his friends behind. The battle against Pandan leaves Dan nearly fatally injured. Despite that, Dan stays on Earth anticipating the alien Gosei's next move. He departs the Ultra Guard, trying to keep his identity a secret when they want to operate on him. Eventually, Anne catches up, and Dan finally reveals to Anne that he is Ultraseven. To her, Dan Moriboshi is Dan Moriboshi. She doesn't want Dan to leave, but it's his final battle. This confession is accompanied by beautiful visual silhouettes of Anne and Dan, with a piano sting that has never left my mind. That piece happens to be Schumann's Piano Concerto in A minor, which plays throughout the rest of the episode. The Ultra Guard destroys Alien Gosei's ship, while Ultraseven defeats a reconstructed Pandan. When the morning star shines, a single light will fly into space. That's Ultraseven. No, Dan Moriboshi saying goodbye, but he'll be back as the true fighter and the 7th member of the Ultra Guard. And Dan did return, which came as a surprise since Ultraseven was intended to be the last of the Ultra trilogy, but its success meant the series would continue. Ultra Q introduced new larger-than-life stories, Ultraman perfected them, and Ultraseven cemented Supro in Japanese pop culture for being able to bring adult themes to a sci-fi show and more. However, the next installment in the Ultra series would pause after the conclusion of Ultraseven. Supro focused on shows like Mighty Jack and Operation Mystery. The former presented an outwardly science fiction setting, mostly influenced by the James Bond franchise with the use of espionage and advanced weaponry. The latter was focused on the paranormal, depicting the fight against it with technology. Both were made in the aftermath of Ultraseven, and both were still in the realms of Tsuburai's sci-fi style. Koji Motosugu also had a guest spot in Mighty Jack's sequel, Fight Mighty Jack, and in keeping with the show's lighter tone than its first entry, he pulls out an ultra-helpful wrench. Anybody who missed that time Hayata pulled out a spoon instead of a beta capsule, here you go. Ultraman and Ultraseven wouldn't stay dormant during this time, however, as they made consistent appearances throughout Japanese media and stage performances. One particular thing to note is Supro's experiment with large-scale cinema known as Circlorama, titled Ultraman Ultraseven Moritsu Daikaiju Sen, or Deadly Great Monster War. This film was shown only for the Karakoen amusement park between March and May of 1969. It depicts a trippy team-up between Ultraman and Ultraseven as they save Buska and his adopted brother, Kamegon, from a troop of previously defeated kaiju, though it seems Seven does the legwork here for whatever reason. Still, the only other way fans could see a team-up between Ultraman and Ultraseven was through books and magazines, so to see them physically together must have been pretty special for the time. Sadly, this foray into experimental territories and TV drama would be cut short, as Eiji Tsuburaya passed on in 1970. The company that Eiji tirelessly built would be taken over by his son, Hajime, who was only a director for their shows beforehand. The company released Ultra Fight as their first attempt back into the still disconnected Ultra series. The first batch of episodes reused fight scenes from Ultraman and Ultraseven, with added narration from popular sports announcer Jiro Yamada. Seven himself would come back in a big way, as episodes depicted brand new footage of him fighting off monsters across the entire franchise, albeit with a shoestring budget. No explosions, no special effects, no finishing beams. It was just Seven fighting off monsters, sometimes with his ice slugger, but many times with a Heisei slash using his hand. Ultra Fight turned out to be a success, and the franchise was popularly revived through Return of Ultraman in 1971. The Return of Ultraman was a return to form, also having Ultraseven making brief appearances in this, and following seasons in Ultraman Ace and Taro. Seven also had a recurring role in Ultraman Leo, where after being reduced to his human form as Dan, he trains the young Leo in brutal ways to fight against the monsters. At first, he was meant to be an entirely different character played by Koji Motosugu, but the popularity of Seven made his re-entrance into the series an important one. While still a popular character, Ultraseven grew out of the mainline Ultra series and had a sequel series, which is often referred to as Heisei Ultraseven. Its official name is just Ultraseven, but, well, you know. Why it's called that should be pretty self-explanatory, since it debuted in 1994, and 1998, and 1999, and 2002. In my personal opinion, Heisei Ultraseven is fine, I guess. The sequel stories are good and the action is certainly more modern, but I don't know, it just didn't grab me like the original did, and having a host instead of Dan didn't exactly help. I watched a few episodes with Liz, a few episodes myself, but still nothing.
I can talk about it instead.
Wait, what?
So, from its inception, Ultraseven was intended to be its own timeline, completely removed from the world that Ultra Q and Ultraman took place in. The Return of Ultraman came along and brought the two timelines together, and even grouped all Ultramen shown as the Ultra Brothers. You know, except Seven's superior, but nobody really talks about him. But the idea of Seven being the only Ultra who came to Earth is still a cool idea. So, with the revival of the Ultra series on the rise, Tsuburaya Heisei released a duology of specials broadcast on NTV in 1994, taking place in Ultraseven's own timeline. Then it turned into several specials to celebrate several events such as Ultraseven's 30th and 35th anniversaries, which is why this series was released across 8 years. If you thought the original Ultraseven was too drastic of a change in its pacing and tone, then you probably wouldn't like the Heisei series. Each episode is almost an hour long and it's incredibly procedural, especially the first 2 episodes. I'd go so far as to compare it to American sci-fi, specifically like Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I personally like the change. It's way more serialized and episodic, and there's a clear continuity from beginning to end. No need for people to tell you which episodes to pick out from the series, it's just all right there. In the very beginning of the episode, Seven is shown falling to the earth after battling some yet unknown entity, and Yuri's son, named Dan, sees it and thinks it's an asteroid. There's a tearful reunion between Furuhashi, now a captain of the UG, and a top-ranking official in the TDF, and the comatose Ultraseven. There's also stuff dealing with the returning alien pit, but I guess the episode decided that focusing on Anne's completely solar-powered house is more important. Eventually, Seven awakens and fights off a brand new King, and finishes off the alien pit. Flying off, the team declares that they have to keep defending the Earth from pollution and climate change. I mean, I agree, but man, we should have gotten more Seven there. The second episode is not much better, and the eco-friendly stuff is yet again the main focus. But there is a fight between Seven and Metron, who have just resurrected a dinosaur to enact their plan for world domination. I would have suggested they do something akin to their cigarette plan, like they could have easily tied it back to the eco-friendly stuff, but whatever. It ends with Seven being caught in the middle of the Metron's exploding base, and the 1998 episodes start with Dan on Earth as an amnesiac. He eventually comes to his senses, and he's back to solving mysteries and stopping aliens from destroying the Earth. There's also a brand new Ultra Guard team. Don't know what happened to the other one from the first 2 episodes, or maybe I do and I don't really want to talk about it right now. So these episodes are actually the ones that Tsuburaya released on video, by the way. They really pick up the pace, and the success of Tiga and Dinah give it a much better budget than before. I chalk up the whole eco-friendly aspect in the first 2 episodes to the networks wanting to have a reinforced moral behind it, which I feel could have been utilized way better. I can't begin to tell you how many eco-aware sci-fi stories there are that do much better than the first 2 episodes of Heisei Ultraseven. 1999 starts out with an unknown entity entering a TDF spacecraft with Furuhashi on board. When the spacecraft lands on the moon, the entity starts to mind control those in the base. With explosions everywhere and personnel shooting each other left and right, Furuhashi is sadly caught in the middle of this. Ultraseven arrives to save Furuhashi, but he is too late, and he passes on. The alien makes its way onto Earth, and he starts to cannibalize the Ultra Guard from the inside out. The team become freelance alien police due to the TDF putting an end to the UG, and in the last standoff between them and the alien, Dan is forced to shoot Masaki Kazamori, the team member who he encountered and even impersonated as in the 98 episodes, as his body is being controlled. After the battle, Dan makes a vow to Furuhashi that he will protect the team that were abandoned in his wake. Like Ultraman and Shin Hayata before him, Ultraseven takes control of Kazamori's body, healing him in the process. In the ending to the 1999 series of videos, Ultraseven is put on trial for putting himself in matters between the Earth and its alien invaders. Seven accepts his fate, knowing what he did was for the greater good, and his sentence is being encased in stone. In the last release of these videos, subtitled Evolution, Kazamori is shown to have heightened senses and powers after being bonded with Seven, and it's through these powers that he is able to connect with the imprisoned Seven to also become Ultraseven himself. What the heck? Yeah, I really wish Kazamori got his own Ultra form, just to differentiate the original and new Sevens. Although, I kinda get it. The original show had Seven superior, and if we're led to believe that what Dan saw wasn't a representation of its own subconscious, which is a theory I really like in the timeline of the Ultra Brothers, then I guess every single person in his species looks just like him in this timeline. So there's not much of a reason for Kazamori 7 to look different. But man, imagine if he had Zero Suit. That'd be so cool. The series was basically successful from start to finish. Original videos are usually made to gauge the interest of the general public, and if they're successful, more is made. That's why when it comes to anime, an original video anime is released, and a full-length anime series comes right after it. In the case of Ultraseven, more and more videos were released, even when the 1999 series was subtitled Final Chapters. I enjoyed it well enough, except for the 1994 specials. Those are pretty bad, all things considered. But I do recommend you watch them still because they are in continuity. Plus, the thing about the 1994 team comes back in a major way that I didn't scratch the surface of. The 1998 series is great, although there's not much of a driving force throughout the series. It's all classic Ultra 7, except serialized. Then the 1999 videos ramp things up a notch with Furuhashi's death. There's also a lot more going on with every individual member of the Ultra Guard here, which I appreciate a lot compared to the original team. There are even entire episodes and storylines dedicated to them, and new member Yuki and evolution is extremely important to the plot. There's way more focus on the Earth politically rather than a victim of alien threats. It's the natural evolution of what humanity was facing up against in the original show. The internal politics of the TDF and their relationship to the Ultra Guard was actually one of my favorite aspects. It's something I wish other Ultra shows took notes from. The focus thereafter of the TDF and how they defend the Earth is also pretty ambitious, given the fact there wasn't really a precedent before it in the Ultra series. I really like how they recontextualize monsters shown in other shows, like Bolton or Oil Drinker, as kaijus that the Ultra Guard have successfully defeated before. As for individual episodes, I do recommend you watch it from start to end, but standout favorites of mine include Eternal Earth from 1998, The Soaring Iron Colossus, The Imitated Man, and I Am an Earthling from 1999, and Perfect World, Neverland, and Akashic Records from the 2002 series. If you ever saw that one King Joe fight where he splits apart to avoid Seven's wide shot, that's from Imitated Man. It's awesome.
Well, I'm glad you liked it at least. So, does that mean you'll talk about Ultraseven X too?
Nope, it's all on you, dude. Check out my new channel, Liz Says Things, where I talk about a whole bunch of crazy crap I'm into. See ya.
Damn it. After Ultraman Mabius in 2006, the mainline series would go dormant again, with other projects filling in the spots until Ultraman Ginga in 2013. One of these projects would be an Ultra show made strictly for adults, once again using Ultra 7 as a basis. This is Ultraseven X. The pre-2010s were a lawless wasteland filled with angst and dark filters. This is a post-New Metal world, and a special team is formed to fight against aliens. It's mostly episodic, with a general thread holding things together as the main character, Jin, goes on missions. This show may have the name Ultra 7, but that's basically in name only. The suit only shows up a small handful of times, and the rest of the show doesn't feel like it has anything from Ultra 7 related, except, an attack team and aliens. Actually, yeah, the team in Ultra 7 is Deus, whose members are only known by their codenames, letters of the English alphabet, and off the top of my head, I think one of them is named Agent S. Jin wakes up from a deep slumber, and after an alien attack, is given the Ultra Eye. Now he has to fight the aliens? I don't know. I don't even think the show knows. Hey, we already went deep into Ultra 7 and Heisei Ultraseven. I'm not sure what you'd want from Ultraseven X other than it's hard to see through its grainy filters, and it's not good. Does it have a connection to the original Ultra 7? Yesn't. But you don't want to slog through this just to get 2 seconds of your curiosity satisfied. Yeah, don't watch this one. I mean, unless you want to. Ultra 7 was a mainstay as a part of the Ultra Brothers ever since it was formed, and he would show up basically whenever there was a crossover or when a Showa representative was needed. Although we see more Ultra 7 in suit, Dan Motoboshi has a few appearances as well, such as during an iconic transformation with all the Ultra Brothers out of suit in the Ultraman Saga movie, and when he showed up in the Ultraman Orb movie to celebrate his anniversary. Seven. More recently, Ultra 7 can be seen with his son, Ultraman Zero, who became an icon in his own right, debuting in the Mega Monster Battle Ultra Galaxy movie, then starring in his own films, although that's a legacy for another day. And lastly, Tsuburaya has been able to fully release the Ultra series overseas, and of course that includes Ultra 7. The first few releases received a special tin cover, which I absolutely had to buy. Plus he has a comic book now. Remember to support the official release. And to have a personal anecdote here, when I first started getting into Ultraman, I wasn't really sure what to watch until Liz one day told me, hey, let's watch Ultra 7. And so then we sat down, we watched a couple of episodes, including episode 45, the abstract one. And the whole time, I personally thought the show was super boring. I kind of just sat there, I thought some of the fight scenes are cool, and then everything else was just like, okay, I guess I get it, but it's still kind of boring. And then overnight I thought about it, and I kept thinking about it. Ultraman to me delivers hope. And Ultra 7 delivers hope under a darker tone. And then I just started watching Ultra 7 nonstop from there. Now I have a whole collection of Ultraseven things, including an Ultraseven figure that my friends Miguel and Liz bought for me for my birthday. So of course, Ultraseven is special, not just to me, but to the whole world. The legacy of Ultraseven cannot be understated. From his debut in 1967 to the modern day, the 7th member of the Ultra Guard will always be an icon, and the show itself is a masterpiece. This man, this Ultraseven man, is a great superhero, and he will continue to be loved by all. Whenever you see a light fly into space when the morning star shines, you can be assured it's Ultraseven flying back to the M78 galaxy.